Hi again guys, and welcome to another installment, of course, of Beards and Cars. This is my podcast style series where, as many of you who have checked out these episodes before will know, we tend to have more of a discussion in the comments with suggestions for the videos themselves. Could be predictions sometimes, a countdown, problems with a game, good things about a game, all that kind of stuff. And this one is a community suggested topic, and it's a very, very personal one. Now, we've talked about stuff like this before, but I don't think we've actually covered this as an entire episode. We might have, but I don't think so. And that is, as you saw from the title and the thumbnail, what would your dream or perfect Gran Turismo game be? Now, there is no right or wrong answer for this, because it's all down to personal preference, and it's always good when you can have a video like that, because it means that you can go down into the comments, you can pour your heart into it, and it doesn't really matter what somebody else says, because even if it's the dumbest idea ever, it doesn't really matter, because it's what you want from the game. Now, of course, you could take that and run with it and make it absolutely ridiculous. You know, I want one track and the Daihatsu midget, and that's it. You know, you could say that if you wanted to, but if you are more serious about it, then I think there can be some interesting creative flow that can happen. Now, for me personally, my idea of a perfect Gran Turismo game is very clear, and it's pretty much been unchanged since a couple of games ago to some degree. And to put it simply, and we can get more into it in a second, just like you can in the comments as well, my perfect Gran Turismo game, so let's say Gran Turismo 7, for instance, would be a game that has the physics of Gran Turismo 5, because I love the way the cars handle on that game. Gran Turismo 6 kind of dropped the ball a little bit to me compared to Gran Turismo 5. The cars felt much smoother, it was a much more fun driving experience, at least to me. So I would have the physics of Gran Turismo 5, the graphics of Gran Turismo Sport, the layout of Gran Turismo 4 in terms of the career mode and the menu, and the cars of Gran Turismo 2. Now, even if that meant I could not add any new vehicles to the game, that would mean that we would lose all LMP cars. We would lose all Formula cars. We would have no NASCARs apart from that Mitsubishi Taurus that you can turn into one. If you had the exact car list of Gran Turismo 2, but with the graphics of Gran Turismo Sport and the physics of Gran Turismo 5 applied to them, that would be perfect to me. Because the thing about Gran Turismo 2, for those who haven't played it, is the reason why many of us love the cars in that game so much, and the selection, is because it's totally different to any of the other Gran Turismo games. In most of the other Gran Turismo games, but especially from 4 onward, there was much more of an inclination towards having significant cars. Cars which were memorable, which were really important to the brand, which had motorsport lineage, and also some oddball flavour thrown in there as well, with stuff like the Chaparrals, the Nike, the Jay Leno tank car, and a few others too. And that's all well and good. I love Gran Turismo 4. It's actually my favourite Gran Turismo game overall, but the car selection in Gran Turismo 2 is the most realistic selection of cars we've ever had, because they had so many vehicles which seemed pointless. They were just normal everyday cars. We had like 2 or 3 variations of the Dodge Neon. Now, the funny thing about that is, later on, I am the kind of person who would complain about the amount of Skylines and MX-5s we have, but there's a clear difference to me, because in Gran Turismo 2, although there are some definitely needless duplicates, especially in the used Japanese dealerships, it's nowhere near as much of a glaring issue as it is in the later games, because unlike those later games, we're not just talking about 100 variations of an MX-5. It's much more interesting than that, because the variations that they had tended to be of less obvious cars as well. Because back then you had some really obscure K cars compared to what we have now. You had stuff like the Mazda 323 GTR. I'm trying to even recall the other ones. There was an older version of the Toyota Starlet. There were some weird little kind of those speciality Japanese style hatchbacks. I can't recall the names of any in particular, but I think you know the ones I mean. The ones that kind of look like a weird fusion of classic and modern. They're not really performance cars, they're just kind of weird, cute little things, like the car equivalent of anime. And we had some really notable motorsport vehicles. Of course, the Renault Espace F1, for me, my favourite car of the whole series, but also stuff like the Lotus Elise GT1, the Lotus Esprit GT1, which gets even less love, the Vector M12, the Uyghur Vector, the Vector race car, which incidentally is a real thing, that's an actual race car, the Venturis, the 400 GT, the 300 bi-turbo, the 600 LM, which is also a real race car. You had, of course, amazing tuning. No other Gran Turismo game has ever come close to the visual tuning that Gran Turismo 2 had, because Gran Turismo 2 had it so that you could full-on convert road cars into race cars. And I don't just mean fitting a wing on the back. You could pay, I think it was either 50 or 80,000 credits. I think it might have been 80,000. And it would turn the car into a race car. And it would actually make differences to the vehicle beyond just the look. If I recall correctly, it would actually drop the weight a little bit as well. For instance, the TVR Speed 12. If you buy a TVR Speed 12 in, say, Gran Turismo 4, for instance, or Gran Turismo 6, what can you do to it? You can upgrade the power, you can drop the weight, you can fit the tyres, the brakes, the suspension, you can fit a rear wing and change the rims, and on the later games, from 5 onward, you could change the colour. And it's funny to think that you couldn't do that before. If you wanted 2 TVR Speed 12 colours, you had to actually buy 2 TVR Speed 12s. It's kind of crazy now looking back. But back in Gran Turismo 2, not only did they have the original Speed 12, the 712 concept, the purple or pink one, but you could actually turn that into the white and blue racing version that can be seen on that old school episode of Top Gear where Clarkson drove it. That's awesome to me. Or being able to convert anything from a little K car to a Subaru Impreza wagon to a Ford Puma to whatever into a little like touring car or a cup car, or taking a Citroen Saxo and turning it into a WRC style machine. I think it's an F2000 car in particular, or taking a Peugeot 306 and turning it into the actual white and blue Rally 306. It's just such a cool setup that they had in that game. Now, the reason why I would combine that with the menu and the layout of Gran Turismo 4 is because, to me, the vibe that I always loved the most about Gran Turismo is when it gave you this real feeling of being a globe that you were playing on. Not just for all the cars and the different places, but that the map really was a map. In that game, it literally was a map. You moved around different points. In Gran Turismo 3, I mean, I've said before, Gran Turismo 3 is my least favourite game of the whole franchise, and I know a lot of people find that crazy, because it's the favourite of a lot of people. Maybe that's the one that you started with, whatever. I just find it to be incredibly limited in scope compared to all of the others. It's the smallest Gran Turismo game in terms of how many features and cars and everything that it has. But people do still have love for it, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't include anything from Gran Turismo 3. I think probably the main thing that I like about that game is complex string, and of course that's the only game in the franchise to feature that track. Apart from that, I kind of like the vibe that the game has. It has a very fun, happy-go-lucky kind of jazz vibe to it, with the colours and the menu and the music. But I've never liked the handling in that game. All the cars just slide. The graphics are very limited, very pasty, not many details. And of course it's on the PS2 and it was optimised as a brand new game. But still, it doesn't look great. It doesn't hold up particularly well as far as I'm concerned. And in terms of Gran Turismo 6, I would say probably include the amount of cars that game has, but I already said that I'd include the cars of Gran Turismo 2. Now, of course, I don't need to tie my hands like that. If I wanted to, I could say the cars of Gran Turismo 2 and the cars of Gran Turismo 6. And technically, why not? Let's say that. So you've now got, I don't know, there's 1,200 cars in GT6. I can't recall how many of those were in GT2, but not a huge amount. You had maybe one or two, stuff like some of the Subarus or some of the Skylines. So let's say that 200 of the cars from GT6 were also in GT2. I think that's probably a fairly high amount, and I don't think there are that many. But that's factoring in all the RX-7s, the S2000s, the Skylines that could be in both games. That means that there are still something like 400 unique cars in Gran Turismo 2 that not only did Gran Turismo 6 not have, but literally none of the other games in the whole series have had. The Vectors, the Venturis, the Espas, the Lotus, plenty more. The Suzuki Cultus Pikes Peak Special, the Dodge Copperhead, also known as the Dodge Concept Car, the Chrysler Phaeton, which I was mad about as a kid. There are so many cool cars. One of my favourite rally cars, the Daihatsu Storia rally car. Of course, I've said before how much I love the Storia Cross 4, the road version, and that is in the later games. But the rally car with 400 horsepower, that was never included again, and it was amazing. How about the Vauxhall Tigra ice race car, technically the Trofei Andros car? That's an amazing little rally car. Again, never featured since. There were just some really cool cars in that game, and there were even some cars which weren't fully released. I believe you can see screen grabs of a Mercedes CLK GTR in Gran Turismo 2 on Google. And it looks pretty amazing with those old school graphics, actually. It's got a nice charm to it. There's even stuff like the secret Mercedes CLK DTM coupe that's just silver. It's pretty cool to have those kind of cars, and when you add that on top of the cars that are in Gran Turismo 6, even if you don't include the newer stuff in GT Sport, because there aren't a huge amount, there's a couple of dozen unique cars maybe, but in GT6 and GT2 together, that's a huge amount of cars to work with. That's like 1,600 cars. That's more than enough. I mean, of course you could always say that we want more, but those cars alone would keep you going for a long time. It would take you probably at least 4 to 6 months to buy most of the cars in the game, and even then you'd still have all those different variations that you hadn't tried out. I mean, we've done episodes of series on this channel called Pick of the Pack, and the entire purpose of those episodes is to buy all of those different variations of stuff like the Skyline and the MX-5 to find out which ones are actually worth buying. So doing that alone takes a significant amount of time. Now multiply that by 1,600 cars, especially when a lot of the players have never experienced those cars in Gran Turismo 2. It would be such an exciting feeling to not only appeal to the nostalgia of those of us who have played for so long, but also to introduce these newer players to cars which they might have not even heard of before. That's awesome to me. It would be so fun. And the reason why I say Gran Turismo 4's layout and career in particular is because, if memory serves, no other game in the series has had a career mode as expansive as Gran Turismo 4, because I really like the way that they did it. They would structure the career mode in such a way that there were like these little secret races that you could find. They weren't really secret, but you could just forget that they were there, because the manufacturer events were literally in each manufacturer's dealership. So you'd have to go over to like Australia, then click on the Holden dealership. Now, I don't think there was a Holden race, but that's an example. Go over to, for instance, the Dodge dealership, and then you've got events for Dodge only. That to me is really cool, and again, Gran Turismo 2 had that. Now, another thing that I would include from Gran Turismo 5 is B-Spec, because B-Spec is something which we've had in, of course, a number of the games, 4, 5 and 6 in particular, but I would say that it was definitely perfected in Gran Turismo 5. Because Gran Turismo 4 had a very cool feature where you could speed it up. You could make it 3 times faster, which would make a 24-hour race last 8 hours instead, which is very cool. But that's not very realistic. It kind of feels like a cheat. So I would take that feature away. As cool as it is, if you're gonna do that race, make it authentic. Make it feel like you've actually raced for 24 hours, or in the case of B-Spec, directed it for 24 hours. So that's exactly what I'd do. I'd have the B-Spec mode, and maybe even a full B-Spec career mode, like Gran Turismo 5 implemented, because I love that aspect of the game. It might even be my favourite thing about Gran Turismo 5. So there are all these little details which I think you could easily include from each of the existing Gran Turismo games, and in a funny kind of way, I feel that Gran Turismo is one of these series where players who are new to it in particular tend to always clamour for new stuff. They want the new cars that we've never had before. But the truth of the matter is that unless you've played every game in the franchise, which most of those new players haven't by definition, there is more than enough content in the series so far that if you combined all of the greatest hits, if you will, of Gran Turismo into one game and called that Gran Turismo 7, you would have none of the complaints that people have now about wanting new cars all the time. because you'd have 1,600 cars, a career mode that would take you easily 6 months, maybe even a year to complete everything, because that's what Gran Turismo 4 took. You'd have this amazing layout, which I've said before, I love the art design of GT4, it's got a euphoric vibe. You'd have races which are so specific that they lose all the generic feeling that GT Sport has. Because with GT Sport, the career mode was literally an afterthought. We had it after the release of the game, whereas in GT4 there was so much effort put into the career mode. All of the races felt like they actually meant something. All of the series felt like they meant something. The endurance races felt like endurance races. So to have that kind of vibe back, the truth is that, as I was saying, if you combined all of those greatest hits, there is more than enough content in those older games that if you put it together, you'd have an incredible Gran Turismo game, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I think that a lot of those people who, for instance, started with GT Sport would be easily satiated by a game that massive in scope. Now, eventually you'll have people, and I mean, even at the start, you'll have people who always complain about something. But to some degree, I think that a game like that would appeal and satisfy far more of the community than GT Sport has. Now, I'm not one of those people who goes out of my way to bash on GT Sport. I actually think that the game has a lot of good stuff to offer, and of course I cover a lot of content for it for a reason. But I can understand why people stopped playing it. I can understand why people were disappointed with it. I was certainly disappointed with it when it first came out, especially considering that I paid £110 or £120 for the collector's edition. That's an expensive game, and even the regular version, you're paying what, 40 quid, 45? You expect something for that, and it wasn't even a finished game. Now, at the same time, if you were to release a Gran Turismo 7 that is so massive in scope as what I'm saying, I think the community would go crazy for it. And I think that not only would all of the people from GT Sport continue playing, I think all of those people who don't play would come back. And I think you'd bring players in who maybe are older now, maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who haven't played in years, but they see a game that reminds them of when they used to play, and I think they'd come back. I think that if you made a Gran Turismo 7 like that, which of course wouldn't even be possible, they don't have the manpower to do that, but if they did, I think it would easily be the single best-selling Gran Turismo game of them all. So of course it's never going to happen, but I would love to see it happen. That would be my dream Gran Turismo game. So all in all, I don't think there's anything in particular I would include from Gran Turismo 1, because I didn't play that game as extensively as the others. Nothing really jumps out to me at that game, or from that game. I'm sure it does for some of you. But for me, I would say the car selection of Gran Turismo 2, the menu layout of Gran Turismo 4, with all the career modes and the menu itself, the driving physics, the handling in particular, and also the B-spec of Gran Turismo 5, the car selection of Gran Turismo 6, and the physics, and the graphics, I should say, of GT Sport. And also, I would include, because I would want to include these people as well, because I don't want to leave them behind, I would include the FIA integration as well into Gran Turismo 7. Because the difference is, a lot of the people who I've spoken to about GT Sport and about the things that they were disappointed about it for, was because they felt like the FIA stuff was being shoved down their throats, and that's not what they wanted from a game. That's not what they wanted from any racing game, let alone a Gran Turismo one. So what I would do is I wouldn't deny the FIA fans that opportunity, which, let's be honest, that's kind of what Polyphony has done to the rest of us who don't want the FIA. It's kind of just tough, either play it or don't. What I would do is include both. That's basically what I do here on the channel. I made it clear that I wanted to cover Forza and Gran Turismo, and I do not tolerate cross-brand hate. If I see that, you get banned immediately. So I like the idea of combining communities. So within the community of Gran Turismo, there is a current rift between the people who hate GT Sport, and there are plenty of them, trust me. I talk to a lot of people and have messages from a lot of people who are very disgruntled with it. But those people could easily be brought back. Even if it was like Gran Turismo 6, let alone what I said, they would come running back with those kind of graphics and physics that GT Sport has. But I wouldn't want to push the FIA players and lovers away. Have both. because of course this is a dream scenario. So I'm not saying something that I think Polyphony should do, because realistically I know that they can't accomplish this. In fact, the only way that Polyphony could accomplish what I just said is by either like doubling or tripling their team size, because there's 100, 200 people or something working for them. So they would have to triple the size, or work with somebody else to outsource it, like, I don't know, Turn 10, for instance, with Forza. If you combine their powers to make a game, obviously that would be a considerably different game, but that kind of thing, where they outsource to get more help, more manpower, then you could accomplish it. But realistically, of course, that's not going to happen. Now, as a little bit of a, I could say an Easter egg, maybe a little bonus thing, I think one thing that would be the cherry on the top of the cake for me to make it a perfect Gran Turismo game is if you also folded Tourist Trophy into it as well, kind of like Gran Turismo HD, where you had the cars and the bikes, and include not necessarily any new bikes, but just the bike selection of the first Tourist Trophy game, because we of course don't have a second one yet, here's hoping, but again with the graphics updates of GT Sport. And maybe with updated physics as well, but the physics in Tourist Trophy were actually already pretty good. So that would be my perfect game. A pretty extensive and complex one, and a very large one in terms of the production scale, but I have no doubt it would be immensely popular. I think people would absolutely love it. I know I certainly would. And to be honest, I don't even think you'd need any DLC at all. Because, again, Gran Turismo 1, 2, 3, and 4, we did just fine without any DLC. I didn't hear anyone complaining back then that they wanted more cars. They were amazing, the cars that we had. It's only since we've had that option that we've started shouting for it, basically, and some people are more vocal than others, of course. So for me, I don't think you'd even need DLC with 1,600 cars. You'd have people who say it, but you don't need it. You'd have more than enough to keep you going, especially with the bikes on top. I mean, how many bikes were there in Tourist Trophy? Like 200 or 300? That's a massive amount of vehicles in one game. So, I mean, if I ever had the opportunity to, like, crowdfund some kind of collaboration with Polyphony to, like, work with Kaz to accomplish something like this, that would be very cool. I mean, how awesome would that be if this channel eventually could contribute to something like that? But, you know, it's Dreamland stuff. But that's the whole point of the episode, so slap down below what your dream Gran Turismo game would be. Maybe a blend of things, could be something completely new, could be like an open world game, Gran Turismo World for instance, like the equivalent of Forza Horizon. Whatever, slap it down below, and of course have some discussions. But try not to bash on other people, because it's personal preference, that's the whole point. But overall, that's it for this installment. Of course, I will see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.